Hi, and welcome to View Arts Center. This is part of our Zoom lecture series with Beth McLaughlin. This is our second one we are doing of the art of craft, and I'm happy to have Beth here to have a conversation about art versus craft and her opinions on it and takes on where we're at now. Beth, if you could introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Sure, absolutely. Hello, everyone, and thank you all for joining Kelsey and I tonight. My name is Beth McLaughlin, and I'm the artistic director and chief curator at Fuller Craft Museum in Brockton, Massachusetts. And I'm delighted to be here.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
If you want to tell us a little bit about your background and how you got started in
Sure.
as a curator, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been asked this question before, and just thinking about how I may have um, started not just as a curator, but also in this field of craft. And I think in a way it was a little bit preordained. I grew up in Western Massachusetts in an antique farmhouse from the early 1800s. My mother was an antiques collector. She was also a quilter and she dabbled in historic restoration. One of my grandmothers was a painter and she worked in textiles, and my other grandmother was an unbelievable crochet and knitting enthusiast. My grandfather, he didn't want to be left out either, so he was a woodworker and furniture maker. So I grew up around making and handwork and craft, and from an early age, I recognized how meaningful it is to live with objects that have been made by hand and made by people that you love and that love you. After I graduated from college, from University of Vermont with an art history degree, I began my career in the arts as a corporate art consultant in Boston, Massachusetts. And after a few years doing corporate art sales, I switched over to museum work and started working at DeCordova Sculpture Park and Museum, which is a wonderful museum outside Boston. And ended up moving out to California, working at the Oakland Museum of California as a curator, and then moved back several years later to work at the Attleboro Arts Museum. And then finally, in 2011, I ended up at Fuller Craft Museum. I've been there for about 12 years, serving in a variety of roles. I've been the chief curator for the past 6 years and artistic director for about the last 3 years. And the museum, has sure changed a lot over that time, as has the field of craft. But it's a really special place if anyone that's here tonight is ever able to visit.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
So I thought we could start off by reading the intro statement. Either you or I can read it. It's
I don't have it on me, so if you
okay. I will
if you
read it
can read
then.
it, that would be wonderful.
Just find it here. So as part of what Beth did for us, she was doing the juried part of this exhibition. It was partially juried and non-juried, but she also wrote this wonderful statement that I wanted to read. And you can also see in the galleries, we put it outside the galleries for people to read. Okay. The distinction between art and craft has been a topic of debate since the rise of the studio craft movement in the 1960s. Despite the expansion of the field in the decades since, the relationship between the two genres is still vigorously argued. However, recent years have seen a shift in attitude, with contemporary artists blurring and even obliterating the lines between the categories. The objects selected for the Art of Craft at View Art Center affirm the vitality of the contemporary craft ecosystem through artistry, skill, and an evident commitment to the handmade. Some works embody the rich traditions upon which the art form was built, while others redefine the discipline through the innovation and ingenuity of still more expand our understanding of craft media and its material possibilities. The exhibited objects cover a broad spectrum of utility and expression within the frameworks of the field, from finely crafted functional ware to expressive sculptures with thought provoking content intended to challenge and engage. The spaces in between are also addressed in the art of craft through artworks that coalesce craft traditions with imagining of the future. Regardless of the meaning, material, stylistic approach, or subject matter, all participants in the art of craft affirm the transformative powers of the handmade. Yeah, I thought that was wrapped it up really nicely, and I really
Thank
appreciate it.
you. Yeah, and it was a pleasure. It really was to jury the show and to see all the incredible works that are being made and submitted to the View Art Center. And, I jury, several shows a year for different organizations, and it's always such a privilege for me to see the works that are being submitted and to see also any regional differences in craft and to really to see kind of what the talent is in these different areas. So it was really wonderful to see how the artists and craftspeople and artisans and makers are using their skill and creativity.
Yeah, and it is interesting you say different regions because these are all New York State artists, so it
Yeah,
might be people you haven't seen before. Um,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, it's always real. I always really enjoy doing it because I learn a lot as well about what's kind of happening out there outside the museum walls.
Yes. There's other worlds outside our bubbles
Yeah,
we stay
that's right.
in.
That's right.
Okay, I'll move on to the question portion.
Okay.
When during an exhibition, what makes a piece stand out for you? Creativity, skillfulness, or something else?
That's a good question. Well, as I mentioned, I do jury exhibitions throughout the year for different organizations. And, just if I could say a few words just about the process itself, the vast majority of the assessments that I'm a part of are done online. And, I just want to make it clear to everybody. I like to take this opportunity to tell artists that reviewing and selecting the work from a computer screen is inherently flawed. It's necessary. This is how I'm able to learn all about all the great work being done in the world. But that process, it has its certain limitations. And certainly, I do the best I can. I think all jurors do. But in the case of craft, I think it's particularly difficult to get that sense because I'm looking at these objects that are so rooted in objectness and materiality. And they really do call for an in-person viewing to be fully experienced. So please know that I struggle with it. I think most jurors do. And I would always much rather see these gorgeous works in person. But that's not always possible. So when I am doing a review of the works, overall, if I'm jurying an exhibition, let's say I do aim for a balanced group of artworks. I look for specific conversations that might be happening in the gallery with the selected works. I look for works that could possibly be in dialogue with each other, objects that collectively come together and really activate the gallery and make for an engaging presentation. So I kind of look at it as an overarching exhibition. And then, of course, going in and assessing the pieces individually. And in that process, I do look for works that demonstrate creativity, that exemplify skill, and that really show an understanding of the material. I am looking for works with a very strong point of view, works that are really trying to say something, whether it's through the concept or through a different use of the material. Creativity, of course, is important. It's really exciting for me to see fresh interpretations of traditional techniques in craft. And, I'm always really excited to kind of set my eyes on something that I haven't seen before. But more than anything, I would say, the works that really stand out to me are the ones that bring together the content and the material and the technique to really have this beautiful union of all of those elements. And that to me is kind of like the special sauce, as it were.
Yeah. Great, thank you. And this
Yeah.
was a slightly different one, as you had kind of a select group of people that I knew were coming sent to you, and I was like,
Mm.
kind of try to base it on this, and
Yeah.
this is the standard we're keeping. So, yeah, it's an interesting one to do, semi-juried and semi-invited.
Yeah. And that's, I think, common too. And it just makes for kind of a really just a different type of a presentation. But I like these projects where you have different voices, kind of coming together to present a show. I think it's really cool.
Great, thanks. Okay, next question. What does craft mean to you today versus what it meant in the past?
Yeah. So, craft. So at Fuller Craft, we work in contemporary craft, which is post-war to the present. And of course, the genre of craft goes back thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Um, you know, More modern craft came as a response to the Industrial Revolution. And then, of course, there was the birth of the studio crafts movement in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And that was, work that was largely created in studios and academic environments. Now, today, I think we've seen a really big shift in how crafts is perceived. I think, it's becoming viewed more and more as not necessarily separate from fine art, but as a genre of fine art, and that makes me very happy.
Yes.
um, Similar to fine art, it's defined by creative expression, innovative techniques, design, understanding of your medium. For craft, I think there's a lot more emphasis on hand skills, and of course, its foundation in utility. Um, but today I think what's really exciting about the field is it's expanded so far beyond the studios and the higher education environments of the 70s and 80s. And it's really expanded into all these different types of contexts. We now have artists and artisans and makers and craftspeople and material-based fine artists that are working in such a wide variety of contexts beyond the studios. We see apprenticeships and community spaces and self-taught and DIY and social activism. And there's really just this incredible explosion of craft in society. And I think we're really starting to see it more and more integrated with our everyday world, which in a sense is kind of coming full circle because craft by nature, it's made of everyday materials. We all live with craft every day. We have, from our quilt that's on our bed to the chair that we sit on when we're working. I mean, these are all objects that are rooted in function and craft. And, to kind of see it become as prevalent in society, but just in these different contexts, I think is really exciting. And, my hope is that it will continue to infiltrate the common vernacular, um, as an antidote or a balm to the society that we live in that's so digitized and so much consumer-based goods and highly manufactured items. And I think this kind of return to these one-of-a-kind objects that are made with care and love and with a person's hands, I think is really important, and I hope that continues.
I sure do too. am a big proponent of craft and art combined, and I have the hopes too that it will keep going.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Uh,
I get asked that question a lot. I mean, I think, I don't see them as separate. I really do think craft is just a genre of art, like photography and printmaking and video. And I think that, certainly has its own specific histories and philosophies and educational supports that are separate from the artwork, from the art world. But, I don't see necessarily a huge distinction between the two.
mm,
For me, it's really about how the artists are plugging into the histories of craft and how they're using the material of craft.
Yeah, that's interesting. You think of it as like its own genre that falls
Yeah.
under fine art. I haven't quite heard someone explain it like that, but that makes sense and resonates with me.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think, art is about creativity. And even if an artist is making, a ceramic vessel, let's say, that's just purely rooted in function, there's still creativity that goes into that. There's the choice of the material, there's the choice of the scale of the object or the form itself. So I think even in these objects that are purely functional, there's still creative choices that are being made.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
I actually was able to speak to some of the craftspeople that are in this exhibition a couple weeks ago, and I'd be interested to know your thoughts concerning all the wonderful work you see in identifiers like artist and craftsperson make any difference to you, or if they matter, like what they call themselves, and whom does
Yeah.
it matter?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I don't really see these labels as an either or situation. I don't really see them as binary. I really do feel like, artists, there are artists that are craftspeople and there are craftspeople that are artists. And I just really do see there's really no difference between them. And, for me, it's about the work. So whether someone sends me an email and says, oh, I'm an artist that works in, Old Forge, or I'm a craftsperson that, works in New York City. To me, it's really about the work itself. And kind of feel like sometimes those labels, particularly crafts people, can be almost to the disservice of the artist, because a lot of people just don't see it the way that that I do and see it as kind of the same. Um, so I don't know. I just think that craft is inherently has skill and creativity, and that it's artwork, and that thereby the maker is an artist.
Yeah, it's interesting how some of the artists I spoke to were like dead set on their titles of what they were called. And then there was some that saw it as a transition that they worked up to being an
Hmm.
artist.
Oh, that's
Uh,
interesting.
do you ever see people kind of growing into calling themselves an artist?
I haven't really seen much of that transition. Um, I understand it, and I think ultimately, the artist, whether you're an artist or a maker or craftsperson, you're responsible for your own career and how you perceive it and how you want others to perceive you. So if that's a term that you feel like identifies your own practice the most successfully, then I say, use that. But to me, it's less about kind of the what someone calls themselves and more about the evolution of their work itself and
Mhm.
kind of how that is taking shape.
That seemed to be a theme for them was getting used to the material, becoming more familiar with it, and then they felt they could become creative with it. And then
Yeah.
they're like, oh, well, I'm actually becoming an artist
Yeah.
because I'm using creativity, not following a manual per se.
Right. Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. And I think that, it's a spectrum too. I mean, as I said before, there is creativity in even making the most functional of objects, but your creativity can expand as you start to get into meaning behind the work, into narrative elements, into how you manipulate that material to evoke your message and to really communicate to the viewer what it is that you're trying to say. So I think, um, you know, artists, craftspeople that are looking at this transition, um, I'm sure that it relates in some way to this kind of spectrum that they see themselves on.
Mhm. Yeah, it's I think as I see it, it comes down to the artist deciding for themselves, and outsiders or curators, uh maybe we don't mind as much what they call themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think if you ask, the curator at, I don't know, the Met or something, or a fine art museum, you might get a different response. I mean, certainly
Mm.
I'm coming at it from the perspective of a craft curator that has seen the field shift over the years from kind of being denigrated and being seen as less than or less important than fine art to now becoming a much bigger part of the community, a much bigger part of the conversation. I think it's interesting too how, and I tell people the story sometimes. I went to the I won't say an encyclopedic museum, let's say. I won't name which one. And they had a contemporary craft gallery. And then they next to that they had a contemporary art gallery. And a lot of the works that I saw in the contemporary art gallery I considered to be craft because they weren't functional, but because the way that I see it is the material that the artists are working with. Whether there's function or not, I think that understanding of material and that ability to use one's hands and one's intellect and one's heart to create a piece of artwork, that to me is craft. So I just thought it was such an interesting choice that these works were in the contemporary art gallery and not in the contemporary craft gallery, whereas I would have considered those to be contemporary craft. So it's just interesting. And what makes this field great is that everyone has their own opinions and perspectives. And, there's lots of great conversations that have happened and will continue to happen, like this one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Speaking of conversations and learning about this topic, is there any literature you would recommend for people that want to know more about this?
Yeah, definitely. So I always direct people to Glenn Adamson, who is a very accomplished author, scholar, curator, historian. He's written so many incredible books about craft. I would recommend really anything by him, but specifically Thinking Through Craft is one of his books, and The Craft Reader is another one. He also is the lead editor on a quarterly journal called Material Intelligence that looks at each edition is looking at one specific kind of material and really looking at the different ways in which it's used in today's creative world. And that's really cool and interesting. And Objects USA is another catalog from a exhibition that began in 1969. It was kind of like the launch of the studio crafts movement. There was another Objects USA 2020 that was produced in conjunction with the 50th anniversary. So those two books kind of show the birth of the studio craft movement and then kind of where it is in modern day. So those two exhibition catalogs are great to have on your bookshelf. Um, and I think just the Center for Craft in Asheville, follow their Instagram. They're doing great stuff. Really kind of the thought leaders in the field on what's happening in contemporary craft and doing great work to support craft artists and scholars and educators. Um, and I can also tell you that there's a big movement not a movement, but a initiative that's coming called Handwork 2026 that will be led by the Renwick and the Smithsonian. So that's something to kind of keep your radar. So there'll be a lot of exhibitions across the country that will be related to this big initiative called Handwork 2026.
Great. Thank
So
you for
that's
sharing
something to
that.
keep your eyes out for.
I'm sure your bookshelf is a wonder to have a look at.
Yeah, there's a lot of books. Yeah, I love it. It's a weakness. I
Yep.
can't have enough. Some
And then you're like,
people
"Ooh, should
people
I
hoard
sign
all
up
different
for?"
kinds of things. For me, it's books.
Yeah, and then you get the magazines as well, and you're like, "Should I sign up for another one?"
I
Probably.
know, I know. Oh, speaking of an American Craft magazine is
Yep.
really good because they are so good at finding new talent that's out there. And every time I get it, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to like sit down and read it. So that's a fabulous, if you want, I think it's published quarterly now. It used to be monthly. But
Mhm.
American Craft Magazine is excellent.
Great. Thank you for that.
Yeah, you're
And of
welcome.
course, you can get even more specific with certain materials and
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so many great books out there that are, specific to the different materials or the different subject matters. So yeah,
great.
lots of rich material.
hmm I'll move on to my last question,
Yeah,
and then we'll move on to a Q&A portion where people can
sure.
enter in. There's a little bar below that's a little function that says Q&A, and anyone is welcome to ask questions, but I'll ask this one last one before we move on. Moving forward in this great debate, where do you see the lines between art and craft heading, and what are your hopes?
Well, I think in the great debate, I do think and hope that the lines between the two fields will continue to be blurred and obliterated. And, I hope that craft is not seen as much as less important than or less than, but rather I hope for a deeper understanding of craft and it being viewed as a subgenre of art. Um, like I said, like photography or video or printmaking and the like. So that's my hope, is that it really can continue to be arm in arm with art and not something that's less than.
Great, thank you. Yeah,
Yeah, you're welcome.
I think anyone that has a love for craft, that's our hope, isn't it? We're all rooting for it to just
Yeah. Well, it's such
meld.
a part of our lives too. And,
Mm.
I feel like we find that in the museum. We always joke that it's a struggle for us to keep people from touching everything because
Yes.
there's this accessibility to craft that people feel very comfortable with craft objects. They will come into a quilt exhibition and there's this deep familiarity already just from living with these objects every single day. So I think, you know, we're already starting at the point of having this point of connection for people, which is really wonderful. It's just kind of be a challenge. Sometimes we wouldn't want people to be touching the craft objects in the museum, but I think, it's such an incredible field to work in because there is that personal, that really deeply embedded personal element to it. And, the stories. I mean, there's so many, the stories of craft are just incredible. So I think I always, before Fuller Craft, I worked in other museums in doing painting exhibitions and sculpture. Um, and I can't imagine that now because I just think there's something so special about craft.
It's interesting you talk about this touch because that was one of our first thoughts when we were putting this together. Being the executive director, we're like, people are going to want to touch things. Maybe we need to indicate if they can or not.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah. We
asked
all,
the artist, can people touch these? And some, like the furniture particularly, there was a lot of them that were like, yes, of
yeah.
course.
Oh,
And so we indicated if you could or not. So which I think made this exhibition quite unique. Uh,
yeah, that's great that you could do that. And kudos to the artist for agreeing
there was
to
some that were
that.
like, we want people to touch them. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, we try to have in some of our exhibitions, we have a vitrine with holes on the side and we'll put elements in there for people to touch because I think
Mhm.
even for me that I am like, no, you can't touch. I have to hold myself back so many times and practice my museum hands with my like hands behind my back, because it is just there's such tactility, and a lot of these objects just really seem to be begging to be touched. But as we know, the oil on your hands can really
Yep.
disintegrate the material, so we have to be good. But yeah, I do think that that connecting point is really, such a profound piece of the field.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Well, I'll open up to Q&A now. See if we have anyone out there looking to ask you any questions. Uh, and I want to take this time to thank Travis, who's in the gallery, kind of cruising around, showing us some of
Oh, that's
the
awesome.
pieces. Yeah. I saw it's a little more exciting than two talking heads.
Yeah, no, that's a good idea. Thanks, Travis. I might have to steal that for some of our
Yeah, go
some
right
of our
ahead.
Zoom programs.
Yeah, it's we realize there's a lot of talking heads in these, and it's good to show what
Yeah,
people are talking about.
right. Exactly. It's about the objects.
Yeah. All right, I'm not getting any questions coming in. Uh,
Do you want me to talk about what's coming up at Fuller Craft Museum?
that would be great.
I'd be
Yeah.
happy to share that in case anyone in the audience might be in the Boston area anytime coming up. So next week, we're installing an exhibition called The Red Dress. And it's this absolutely unbelievable gown that was conceived of in 2009 by a UK artist called Kirsty McLeod. And she created this red silk dress and either traveled with the pieces of it or sent them out into the world. And this piece of this garment has been stitched on by almost 400 people from 51 countries. And she used it as a tool for artisans that are from impoverished populations to have a voice through craft. And it's absolutely spectacular. So I had to drive to Pittsburgh this week to pick up the dress from the Frick Museum in Pittsburgh, and I drove it across 4 states to get it back here. So we're going to be opening that next weekend. We then have a fashion and visual art show coming up of a Harlem artist named Beau McCall, who works only in buttons. And it's going to be such a fantastic show. Um, and it might be traveling to Pennsylvania. So we'll keep you posted on that.
Yeah.
And then we have Chris Bathgate, who's a machinist sculptor. So he kind of brings together these fields of craft and machining and art and design. And then a quilting show in June of Michael Thorpe, who's a Brooklyn-based artist, who's unbelievable. So we have a lot going on. We're in this crazy schedule right now. We're installing 7 shows between January and June. So there'll be lots to see.
Wow, that's a lot. Thank you for
Yeah.
taking the time to do this.
Oh, of
Let's pack it
course.
in there.
Yeah, happy to do it. And I'm glad to be able to share about that too. So, and it's all on our website, which is fullercraft.org.
Great. Well, I know a lot of our members here travel a lot and are from all over, so it's great. And hopefully we get some of them there.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. Well, I am not getting any questions in, but I'm glad you could join us for this. We have one more left in this series of exhibitions, which is for another exhibit happening called Northern Lights, which is all light-based artwork of Northeast artists. Uh,
Ooh,
yeah, so
that sounds great.
that will be March 5th at 7, and that's with my co-curator, Ali Feeney, based out of New York City. Yeah, so we'll be doing something similar to this. So hopefully you can tune in too and see the other show we got going on.
Yeah, that's great. Oh, I can't wait to see that.
Yeah, and then we're rolling around to our new exhibits in March too. So it's always
Excellent.
switching over, aren't we?
Yeah, well, good luck with all that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us, and thank you to all of you that tuned in.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Thanks for everyone
Yeah.
for coming. All right,
Bye-bye.
bye.